The phone call came at 2:47 in the morning. Amara Brooks had been awake anyway, three empty coffee cups lined up on her desk like tombstones. Her constitutional law outline bleeding red ink across 6 pages. She was 23 years old, a second-year student at Columbia Law School, and she had not slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. She was used to that. What she was not used to was the voice on the other end of the line, low, unhurried, carrying the particular kind of calm that doesn't try to frighten you because it doesn't need to. Miss Brooks. Not a question. My name is Kangmin Jai. Your father owes me $10 million. He has disappeared. You are now responsible for his debt. You have 48 hours. He hung up before she could speak. Amara sat there holding the phone for a long time. Outside her window, Manhattan kept moving. Sirens, horns, the hydraulic wheeze of a garbage truck working its way up 116th Street. The city had no idea. The city didn't care. She looked down at her constitutional law outline and thought, with the particular clarity that only arrives at 3 in the morning when your life has just collapsed, I studied for the wrong exam. If you have ever loved someone who kept destroying everything you built, if you have ever watched a person you were supposed to be allowed to love turn your loyalty into ammunition, then you already understand Amara Brooks before I say another word. Hit that like button right now and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because the things that happen next in this story, I promise you, you will not see them coming. Stay with me until the end. The man who sold his daughter to pay a gambling debt did not look like a monster. That was the thing Amara had spent most of her life trying to reconcile. Marcus Brooks looked like a father. He had big hands that smelled like motor oil even after he washed them 3 times, and he made the best jerk chicken she had ever tasted. And when she was 8 years old and fell off her bicycle outside their apartment in the Bronx, he had carried her 6 blocks to the clinic on his back because the car wouldn't start, and he refused to make her walk. She remembered the way his shoulder blades moved under his shirt. She remembered thinking he was the strongest person alive. That was a long time ago. The Marcus Brooks of the last decade was a different architecture entirely. Same face, same hands, same smell of motor oil that never quite washed out, but hollowed somewhere behind the eyes. Gambling had done that. Not all at once. Slowly, the way rot works through a foundation, invisible until the floor gives way. Amara had paid his electric bill in November, his rent in February. She had wired $300 from her own student account, money she did not have, when he called at midnight in April saying he needed to eat. She had done all of this while working 20 hours a week at a downtown legal clinic, carrying a full course load, and raising, in every practical sense that mattered, her 16-year-old brother Marcus Jr., who everyone called Junior, from across the borough. She had never told Junior how bad it was. Junior was brilliant, funny, and still young enough to believe their father was just going through a rough patch. She had protected that belief the way you protect a flame in wind. Cupped hands, shallow breathing, constant vigilance. Now she sat at her desk at 3 in the morning and understood that she had failed. She called her father's number 6 times. Voicemail. She called the landline at his apartment in the Bronx. Nothing. She called the cell number of Darnell, the only one of her father's friends she'd ever trusted even slightly, and Darnell picked up on the 4th ring sounding like a man who had been awake for reasons he wasn't going to explain. Darnell, where is my father? A pause. Amara, don't do the voice. Just tell me. I don't know where he is. I swear on my mother I don't know. Did he borrow money from Koreans? The silence that followed was its own answer. How much? She said. Amara? How much? He told her. She had already been told, but hearing it from Darnell in Darnell's frightened voice made it real in a way the phone call hadn't. $10 million. Her father had borrowed $10 million from the Han Syndicate, from the man they called the Mountain in certain circles, from the most feared Korean organized crime boss on the eastern seaboard. And then he had run. He had run and left her name as collateral. She found the document at the bottom of her email, time-stamped 11 days ago, forwarded from an address she didn't recognize. It was a loan agreement. 3 pages, clean and formal, drafted by someone who clearly had legal training. Her full name appeared on page 2. Amara Denise Brooks, guarantor. Her Columbia Law student ID number. Her address? Her phone number. Her father had signed her name to a debt he knew he couldn't pay, and then he had disappeared, and he had not called her, not once, not to warn her, not to apologize, not to explain. Just gone. Amara put the phone down on her desk. She looked at the constitutional law outline. Then she looked at the coffee cups. Then she looked at the window. She did not cry. She had learned early that crying required a kind of safety she couldn't afford. What she did instead was sit very still and think, the way she always thought when things were bad, with a cold and systematic precision that had gotten her through the Bronx public school system, through an undergraduate scholarship at NYU, through the Columbia Law admissions process, through everything. She thought, what are the variables? What can be controlled? What is the actual danger here? The actual danger was Junior, who lived with their grandmother in Queens. Junior, who was in 10th grade and wanted to study aerospace engineering and had never in his life done anything to deserve becoming collateral damage for their father's worst decisions. If the Hahn Syndicate came looking for leverage, and they would, people like this always looked for leverage, Junior was the most obvious target in the world. Amara made one more phone call. She woke her grandmother at 3:30 in the morning, apologized once, and then said very clearly, "Grandma, I need you to take Junior somewhere for a few days. A friend's house? A hotel? I'll pay for it. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't tell Junior why. Just go in the morning, first thing, before he goes to school." Her grandmother, who had lived 81 years and understood the particular shape of serious trouble, did not ask questions. She said, "I'll call Reverend Thomas's wife. She has that house in New Jersey. Perfect. Go there. And Grandma, don't tell anyone. Not anyone. Baby, I wasn't born yesterday." After she hung up, Amara sat in the silence of her apartment and made herself think about Kong Min Jae. She knew the name. Anyone who had spent time studying criminal law in New York knew the name, at least tangentially. He existed in the margins of case files, in the footnotes of organized crime reports, in the kind of careful language federal prosecutors used when they were describing someone they hadn't been able to touch. The Hahn Syndicate had operated in New York for nearly 30 years. They controlled legitimate businesses, shipping, logistics, private security, real estate, wrapped around operations that existed only in paper trails deliberately too complicated to follow. Min Jae had inherited the organization from his father 11 years ago and had, by most accounts, made it significantly more dangerous by making it significantly more invisible. He was 36 years old. He had never been indicted. There were people in federal law enforcement who privately believed he was the most sophisticated criminal operator in the northeastern United States, and they said it with something that wasn't quite admiration, but wasn't entirely separate from it either. He had called her himself. Not an assistant, not an intermediary. Him. That meant something. She wasn't sure yet what. At 6 in the morning, Amara took a shower, put on the best clothes she owned, a dark blazer she'd bought for law school interviews, pressed black slacks, the good earrings her mother had left her, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She was not the kind of woman who needed reassurance from her own reflection. What she was doing was something else. She was taking inventory, deciding who she was going to be when she walked into whatever room was waiting for her. She was going to be a lawyer, not a victim, not a daughter paying for sins that weren't hers. A lawyer. She went to find the Hahn Syndicate. It took her less than 3 hours to locate the address, a tower in Midtown Manhattan, 42 floors of glass and steel that housed, on its upper floors, the registered offices of Hahn Global Logistics. The lobby was exactly what expensive anonymity looked like. Marble floors, minimal art, security staff dressed like hotel concierges. She gave her name at the desk. The man behind the counter didn't react, which meant he was already expecting her, which meant they had been watching her arrive, which sent a cold, deliberate line of awareness down the length of her spine. She rode the elevator to the 38th floor. A woman met her, Korean, late 30s, suit that cost more than Amara's monthly rent, and walked her without speaking down a corridor that was conspicuously short on decoration. All the ornamentation was in the silence. The particular texture of that quiet that said, "Everyone who works in this building knows exactly what this building is." The office at the end of the corridor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown. The Hudson was visible in the distance, gray-blue under a November sky. Kang Min-jae was standing at the window when she came in. He turned when he heard the door. Amara had constructed a mental image of him during the ride uptown, based on every organized crime boss she had ever read about. She had been wrong about essentially everything. He was not physically imposing. Medium height, lean, with the kind of face that looked younger than 36 and somehow also older. Precise features, dark eyes that took in the room with a quality of attention she recognized because she had it herself, the habit of seeing everything and revealing nothing. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie. He looked like someone who had spent the morning reading financial reports. He looked at her the way you look at something you've been told about and are now evaluating against the description. "Miss Brooks," he said. His English was unaccented. "You came alone." "You noticed." She stayed near the door. Not because she needed an exit. She was too smart to think a door would matter in this building, but because she wanted to choose where she stood. "I noticed you called me yourself, not someone who works for you." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. More like recalibration. "Sit down?" "I'll stand. Tell me what you want." He didn't react to her tone. That was the first thing that genuinely unsettled her. She had walked into that room leading with every edge she had, and he didn't flinch, didn't bristle, didn't perform offense. He just looked at her with those level, dark eyes and said, "Your father borrowed $10 million. He signed your name as his guarantor. He is currently unavailable. You have two options." "I heard your options on the phone. I'm here to renegotiate." "There is no renegotiation." "You called me yourself at 3 a.m, she said. "You didn't send someone. You didn't have a lawyer call me. You. Which means I'm not just a number on a loan document to you, which means there is something about this situation that requires your personal involvement, which means—" She paused. "You want something other than money, so let's talk about what that actually is." The silence that followed lasted long enough to be meaningful. Min-jae walked from the window to the chair behind his desk and sat down. He did not ask her to sit again. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't admiration, it wasn't irritation, it was something more careful than either. And then he said, "You speak Korean." She had not expected that. She kept her face still. "Why would you think that?" "Because you've been in this building for 11 minutes, and in that time you've passed 4 conversations in Korean, and your eyes moved each time in a way that meant you understood what you heard." He folded his hands on the desk. "What did my people say about you in the elevator?" She made herself wait a beat before answering. "The man at the security desk told the woman who met me that you said to treat me with courtesy. The woman told someone on her phone that I arrived looking like I wasn't afraid. Someone in the hallway said—" She paused again, choosing "that you wanted to see for yourself if I was actually as sharp as the file said." Min-jae nodded once, slow. "You have a file." "Everyone who owes me money has a file." "Then you know I'm a law student at Columbia. You know I have no assets. You know my father has disappeared and left me holding a debt I can't repay in 48 hours or 48 years. She finally moved, taking 3 steps forward, stopping in front of his desk. "So I'll ask again, what do you actually want?" He looked at her for another long moment. Then he said, with exactly the same tone he might have used to discuss a business merger, "I want you to marry me." The room went very quiet. Amara heard the Hudson wind against the windows. She heard her own heartbeat, which was faster than she wanted it to be and slower than she expected. She stood there in front of the desk of the most powerful criminal in New York, and she thought about Junior in 10th grade wanting to study aerospace engineering, and she thought about her grandmother driving to New Jersey in the morning, and she thought about her father's signature on a document she had never agreed to sign. "If I say no," she said, "then the debt stands. All legal means will be pursued." She understood what legal means meant in this context. She understood it completely. "And if I say yes, the debt is retired. Your brother receives a scholarship and lifetime protection from my organization. You complete your degree at Columbia without interference. I want those terms in writing. They will be. Legally binding, enforceable, drafted by a neutral attorney of my choosing. He didn't blink. Agreed. And I want my own space in whatever living arrangement this involves. Separate, with a lock on the door that only I control. Agreed. She stared at him. He stared back. Neither of them looked away. Why? She said. Not the why of the marriage offer. She didn't understand that yet, but she would figure it out. She always figured things out. But the why underneath it. The why that meant a man this powerful was sitting in his office at 9 in the morning, personally negotiating with a law student from the Bronx who had shown up without a lawyer or a plan or anything except the nerve to walk in and demand a conversation. That, Min-jae said, is a longer conversation. One we can have after you've decided. She looked at his hands folded on the desk. She looked at the windows and the gray sky beyond them. She thought about all the variables. She thought about Junior. I need a pen, she said. He opened a drawer, placed a pen on the desk between them without leaning forward. She picked it up. I want it understood, she said, that I'm not doing this because I'm afraid of you. I'm doing this because my brother is 16 years old and he has done nothing wrong. Understood. And I want it further understood that I'm going to finish law school, I'm going to pass the bar, and I'm going to become an attorney. And nothing about this arrangement changes that. I would expect nothing less. She looked at him one more time. He looked back at her with that same careful, unreadable quality. Not warm, not cold, not anything she could easily name. And she thought, I don't know what you are yet, but I'm going to find out. She signed her name to the terms they had agreed to verbally. Her handwriting was even. Her hand did not shake. Outside the windows, the Hudson moved south toward the ocean, indifferent, gray, endless. And Amara Brooks, 23 years old, a second-year law student who had never asked to be anyone's collateral, closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them, put the pen down, and began to think about what came next. The car that took her to the estate was black, silent, and moved through Manhattan traffic with the kind of ease that comes from either exceptional driving or a city that already knows to get out of your way. Amara sat in the back seat and watched the buildings change. Midtown gave way to the Upper West Side, and then they were moving north along the river, and the Hudson appeared beside them like something that had been waiting. She had one bag. She had packed it in 40 minutes while her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on her door twice asking if everything was okay, and Amara had said yes both times through the closed door because there was no version of the truth that fit into a hallway conversation. The man driving had not introduced himself. There were 2 others in the vehicle she hadn't been introduced to either. They weren't rude about it. They simply existed in the way that security people learn to exist, present without occupying space, watching without appearing to watch. She had been studying criminal law long enough to recognize the particular discipline of men who had been trained to be invisible in a room. She looked at her phone, a text from her grandmother, in New Jersey. Junior is fine. He thinks we're visiting cousin Edna. He's already eaten 2 plates of food and asked if there's Wi-Fi. Amara texted back, Good. Stay there. I'll explain everything when I can. She put the phone in her pocket and looked out the window at the river. She did not let herself think about what she had just signed. Not yet. Thinking about it in the abstract would only produce the kind of panic that consumed oxygen without generating solutions, and she needed oxygen. What she did instead was think about leverage. What she had, what she didn't have, what could be built. She thought about the terms Min-jae had agreed to without hesitation. That bothered her. Not the agreement itself, but the ease of it. In her limited experience, people in positions of absolute power did not immediately concede to every condition presented to them without a single counteroffer. They pushed back. They negotiated. They made you feel the weight of every inch you gained. He had given her everything she asked for in the time it took to pour a glass of water. That meant either he was extraordinarily confident, or the terms she'd demanded cost him nothing because he had already planned to offer them, or, and this was the possibility she kept circling back to, he needed something from her that she hadn't yet identified, and the concessions were designed to make her feel in control long enough to stop looking for what it was. She filed that thought where she filed everything that required more information before it could become useful, and watched the river until the car turned inland. The estate was not what she expected. She had been constructing something in her mind during the drive: gates, guards, the aggressive architecture of a man who needs everyone to understand immediately that he has money and the will to protect it. What she found instead was a property set back from a residential road behind a tree line thick enough to make the house invisible from the street. The gate was there, and the security, but it was all understated in the way that serious money sometimes is, not hiding exactly, but not performing either. The house itself was a converted Georgian manor, 3 stories, stone facade the color of old pewter, surrounded by grounds that ran down toward the river. She got out of the car and stood on the gravel drive and looked at it. "Your wing is on the 2nd floor, east side," said a woman's voice behind her. She turned. A different woman from the one at the office, younger, with a direct way of looking at people that Amara immediately respected. "My name is Su Yon. I manage the household. Mr. Kang asked me to show you to your rooms and answer any questions about the property." "How many people live here?" 12 staff, Mr. Kang, now you." "And the security?" "Rotating, 8 on the grounds at all times." A pause. "You're safe here, Miss Brooks." "I wasn't asking about safety," Amara said. "I was asking about numbers." Suyon looked at her for a moment. Then something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "I'll show you to your rooms." The east wing was 3 connected rooms: a bedroom with windows that looked out over the grounds toward the river, a sitting room with built-in shelves that were mostly empty, and a smaller room with a desk that had clearly been put there recently because it still smelled like fresh-moved furniture. There was a door at the end of the corridor, and when Amara tried it, it was already fitted with a new deadbolt, key on her side only. She stood in the center of the bedroom and breathed. Then she put her bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and let herself feel it. All of it, for exactly 60 seconds. The fear and the fury and the grief that wasn't grief exactly, but something adjacent, the feeling of a floor giving way. She sat with it for 60 seconds, the way she'd learned to do when she was 14 and her mother got sick and she understood for the first time that the world was not organized around her survival. Then she stood up, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and looked at herself in the mirror. "Okay," she said out loud to no one. "Figure it out." She did not see Min-jae that first night. Dinner was brought to her room by a staff member who spoke minimal English and didn't try to make conversation, which she appreciated. The food was Korean, a soup she didn't recognize, rice, 3 small dishes of things she had no names for. And it was extraordinarily good in the way that food prepared by someone who actually knows what they're doing always is. She ate all of it, which surprised her because she hadn't thought she was hungry. She spent the evening going through the binding agreement that had been messengered to the estate by 7 o'clock. The neutral attorney, she had named a professor from Columbia's law faculty, whom she trusted, had already reviewed and countersigned. The terms were exactly as stated, ironclad. She read it 4 times, looking for the clause that would make it collapse, and she didn't find one. That didn't mean it wasn't there. It meant she hadn't found it yet. She fell asleep at midnight with her laptop open and the agreement printed and annotated in 3 colors of ink on the desk. The first morning, she woke at 5:30 from habit, dressed, and went downstairs looking for coffee. She found the kitchen by following the smell, and found Min-jae already there, standing at the counter with a mug in his hand, reading something on a tablet. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and dark pants. No suit. It was disorienting in a way she hadn't expected. He looked younger, less defined by the architecture of his position, more like a person. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. "Coffee is by the stove." She went to the stove and poured coffee and didn't say thank you because she didn't feel like performing gratitude. She stood on the opposite side of the kitchen island and drank and looked at him. "I have a question," she said. "1. Why me specifically? My father had a debt. There are other ways to collect a debt than marrying the debtor's daughter. You didn't need to do this. So why did you?" He set the tablet down and looked at her with those level, unreadable eyes. "I told you that was a longer conversation. It's morning. We have time." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone deciding what to lie about. She had gotten good at reading that particular silence, and this wasn't it. It was more like someone deciding how much of the truth was useful right now. "Park Tae-hyun," he said. She didn't know the name. She kept her face still so he wouldn't know she didn't know it. He runs the East Coast operations of the Daesong network. He and I have been in conflict for 3 years. 2 months ago, his people identified your father as a point of leverage against me, before your father ever borrowed the money. The loan was engineered. The goal was to give Park a reason to come after you. She set her coffee mug down. Why would Park Tae-hun want leverage over you through a black law student from the Bronx whose father is a gambling addict? Because 18 months ago, your father's real name came up in connection with something that happened a long time ago, something that involves my organization's history. He picked up the tablet again, which told her the longer conversation was over for now. I'm keeping you safe, Miss Brooks. That's the truth underneath the arrangement. And the marriage. Makes you harder to move against. Under my name, you have the protection of this organization's full weight. Without it, you're a liability that anyone with a grievance against me can use. She stood there and turned that over in her mind. It was plausible. It was internally consistent. It was also exactly the kind of explanation that could be 90% true and still contain the 10% that would eventually destroy her. What did my father do? She said. Min-jae looked at her over the tablet. I don't know yet. When I do, I'll tell you. She didn't believe the second sentence. She almost believed the first. The first week was a negotiation of space. They were rarely in the same room, and when they were, the air had a particular quality. Not hostile exactly, but pressurized, like the atmosphere before a storm that keeps not breaking. She went to Columbia every day. A car took her. 2 men she learned to identify by their shoes. She never looked directly at security, she'd decided, because looking directly acknowledged a dependency she wasn't ready to accept, were present on the periphery of every class, every library session, every coffee she bought from the cart outside Butler Library. She hated it. She hated it with a physical specificity she could locate in her sternum, a tightness that lived there and had no outlet. She was being protected and watched simultaneously, and those 2 things felt identical from the inside. She called Junior on Thursday. He was still in New Jersey, still under the impression he was visiting cousin Edna, still happy in the way 16-year-olds can be happy when there's Wi-Fi and someone feeding them. She listened to him talk about a YouTube channel he was trying to start and thought about how much she would burn down to keep him sounding exactly like that. When are you coming to see me? He said. Soon. I'm just dealing with something. Is it Dad? She paused. Why would you ask that? Because you always get that voice when it's Dad. A pause on his end. Amara, is he okay? I don't know where he is right now. That's not, I know, Junior. I know. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. I'm handling it. Just stay in New Jersey a few more days, okay? Please. He was quiet. Junior had always been more perceptive than anyone gave him credit for. Okay, he said, with the voice of someone storing the question for later. She hung up and sat in the library and stared at her criminal procedure outline for 20 minutes without seeing it. But on Friday evening, she came home to find a man she hadn't met before sitting in the main corridor outside the study. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of face that looked permanently pleased with itself. He watched her come through the front door with the particular quality of attention that wanted to be felt. Soo Yeon appeared from the east hallway. Something in her posture was different, tighter. Miss Brooks, Mr. Kang is in a meeting. Director Choi is waiting to meet the new wife, the man said, standing. He had a slight Korean accent under the English, carefully managed. His smile was the kind that didn't move the eyes. I'm Choi Seung-ho, Min-jae's consigliere. I've been away or I would have come to welcome you sooner. Amara looked at him. Choi Seung-ho. She extended her hand. Amara Brooks. He shook it. His grip was slightly too firm, the way people shake hands when they're making a point that isn't about the handshake. How are you settling in? Fine, thank you. It's quite a change, I imagine, from a student apartment. He said student apartment the way people say consolation prize. Min-jae can be, a brief pause, deliberately calculated, intense. If you ever need someone to help you understand how things work here, don't hesitate. I generally prefer to figure things out myself. His smile adjusted, minutely. Of course. He glanced toward the study. Tell Min-jae I'll call him tonight. He looked back at her. It was wonderful to meet you, Miss Brooks. I'm sure we'll be seeing a great deal of each other. He left. Amara watched him go. Then she turned to Soo-yeon, who was already looking at the floor. How long has he worked for Min-jae? Amara asked quietly. Soo-yeon looked up. Something moved through her face that wasn't going to make it to words. Many years, she said carefully. He was very close to Mr. Kang's father. Amara nodded slowly. She went upstairs to her room and sat at her desk and wrote the name Choi Seung-ho at the top of a blank page. Then she started writing everything she remembered about the way he had looked at her, and the way he had looked at Soo-yeon, and the way Soo-yeon had looked at the floor. She overheard the first conversation on Sunday. She hadn't been trying to. She had come down the back staircase, the narrower one she'd started using because it brought her out near the kitchen, and she'd developed the habit of coffee before human interaction. And two men were talking in the corridor below. Korean, rapid, the kind of cadence that meant they thought they were private. She stopped on the landing and listened. The first man was someone from security whose name she didn't know yet. The second was a voice she didn't recognize. The director doesn't like her. The director doesn't have to like her. He thinks the boss made a mistake. He said, a lowered voice, he said she's going to become a problem, that she asks too many questions for a woman in her position. What position is that? A short sound, not quite a laugh. Exactly. She stood on the landing and did not move. Below, the conversation moved on to something about a shipment coming through Jersey, and she stopped listening because she'd gotten what she needed. She stood there for another moment, very still, and thought about Choi Seung-ho's handshake and his smile and the precise way he had said student apartment. She went to the kitchen, made her coffee, and went back upstairs. She added 3 lines to the page with his name on it. But she found the legal library on Monday by accident, turning down a corridor she hadn't explored yet off the west wing. It was a room she hadn't been shown, full wall shelves, floor to ceiling, organized not alphabetically, but by jurisdiction and then by decade. She stood in the doorway and felt something she was not prepared for. A physical pang, sharp and specific, like walking into a room that was exactly the right size and shape for you and finding that someone had already furnished it according to dimensions they'd taken without asking. She stepped inside. The books were real, not decorative, not arranged for appearance. The spines were worn in the way that books get worn when they're used. She pulled a 1987 Federal Criminal Code edition from the shelf, and it fell open to a page with a penciled notation in the margin, Korean characters, neat and small. She stood there, holding it. I had it stocked 6 months ago. She turned. Min-jae was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him. 6 months ago, she said, before my father borrowed the money. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back. The weight of what that sentence meant sat between them in the quiet of the library, and neither of them addressed it directly because addressing it would require her to say, "You were planning this before my father gave you a reason," and it would require him to either confirm or deny, and she wasn't ready for either outcome. The 1987 edition is better than the 1992 for pre-sentencing guidelines case analysis, he said. The 1992 tried to account for the reform and ended up less useful than the original. She looked at the book in her hands. I know, she said. I've been using the 87 at the Columbia Library for months. Silence. Why did you learn Korean? He said. She put the book back. Because it's useful. Languages are always useful. How long? 4 years. Started junior year at NYU because I wanted to read untranslated case law from the Korean Supreme Court. There was a professor who let me audit a language course. She looked at him. It surprised you that I understood the conversations in your building. It recalibrated certain things. I imagine it did. She looked at the shelves. You already knew about the Korean I spoke when you offered me the arrangement. It was in the file. No, he said. It wasn't. We knew you'd studied it for a semester as an elective. We didn't know you were fluent. She turned that over. It was the first piece of genuine information she'd gotten from him. A real acknowledgement that she had done something he hadn't anticipated. She stored it carefully. I'm going back to my rooms, she said. I have reading to do. She walked toward the door. He stepped aside, not quickly, not in a way that performed deference, just made room. She was passing him in the doorway, close enough that she could hear him breathe, when he said, Choi Seung-ho asked about you this morning. She stopped, did not turn. What did he ask? Whether you were adjusting, whether you'd asked questions about the organization. What did you tell him? That you were adjusting and that you hadn't asked questions about anything outside your own arrangements. A pause. Which was true, as of when he asked. She stood there in the doorway for a moment. Then she said without turning, He doesn't like me. No? Does that matter to you? A silence that lasted 2 full seconds. More than it should, Min-jae said. She walked back to her wing. She sat at her desk. She looked at the page with Choi's name on it for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and began researching the Daesong network, Park Tae-hyun, and every public record she could find that connected either name to the Han Syndicate, because she had a feeling she was running out of time to be passive about whatever was coming. And Amara Brooks, 23 years old, daughter of a man who had sold her name to buy himself a running start, had never once in her life been passive about anything that was coming for her. She was still at her desk at 2 a.m. when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text message. 4 words only. Your father is dead. She stared at the screen. Her hands were completely still. Her breathing was completely still. The room was completely still. And somewhere underneath all that stillness, something shifted in the bedrock of who she was. Something that had been held in place by the last remaining thread of the version of herself that still believed her father might come back and explain, that might still produce something that looked like a reason, that might make even a fraction of this make sense. The thread snapped. She put the phone face down on the desk and looked at the wall. After a long time, she picked up the pen, turned to a new page, and at the top she wrote one word. Why? And underneath it, she began to write down everything she knew, everything she suspected, and everything that didn't yet add up. Because her father was dead, and someone had texted her from an unknown number to make sure she knew it, and that meant someone wanted her to stop looking. And the only reason to want someone to stop looking was because they were about to find something. She wasn't going to stop. She didn't sleep. She sat at that desk until the sky outside went from black to the particular dark blue that happens an hour before dawn, and she filled 4 pages with everything she knew. Names, dates, the timeline of her father's borrowing, reconstructed from memory, and the loan documents she'd photographed on her phone. The things Min-jae had told her, the things Choi Seung-ho had not said but communicated perfectly clearly with his eyes. The text message, 4 words, unknown number, timed at 2:17 in the morning. Your father is dead. She wrote that in the center of page 3 and drew a box around it and then drew lines outward to everything it connected to. Because the message itself was information, not just the content, but the delivery. Someone wanted her to know. Someone wanted her to know tonight, at 2 a.m, while she was alone in a house full of people who worked for her husband. Whoever sent that message understood her schedule, her location, and the precise moment when the news would land with maximum isolation. That wasn't a stranger. That was someone watching her. At 5:30, she heard movement below, the house coming alive. She closed her notebooks, stacked them under the false bottom of the document box she'd brought from her apartment, an old trick from her childhood, when privacy was the only thing she owned that no one could take, and went to the bathroom to wash her face. She looked terrible. She had looked worse. She went downstairs. Min-jae was not in the kitchen. Soo-yeon was, moving quietly between the counter and the stove, and she looked at Amara when she came in with an expression that crossed the threshold into something human before she could manage it back to neutral. You know, Amara said. Not a question. Soo-yeon set a mug on the counter. Mr. Kang received a call at 3 this morning. He asked me not to disturb you. Where is he now? His office. He said, Soo-yeon paused. He said to tell you he would come to you when he had information worth having. Amara picked up the mug. Her hands were steady. She had made them steady through a long night of practice. When did my father die? I don't know the details. Soo-yeon. The woman looked at her. There was something in her face, Something that had lived there a long time, Amara thought. Something that had learned to stay quiet out of necessity. 2 days ago, she said very quietly, in Atlantic City. They found him in a hotel room. 2 days ago, which meant Min Jae had known for at least a day, possibly more, and had not told her. The person who had texted her last night had known before she did, and had chosen to let her find out from an unknown number at 2 in the morning, rather than from the man she had legally bound herself to. She drank her coffee and did not say anything else. She found Min Jae's office at the back of the first floor, past the library, and through a door that was not marked but was heavier than the others. She knocked twice and opened it without waiting. He was at his desk. 2 other men were in the room. She recognized one as a senior security figure whose name she'd learned was Dai Jung, and the other was someone she hadn't seen before. Both of them looked at her when she came in. Min Jae looked at her and something moved through his face that was as close to discomfort as she had seen on him. "Miss Brooks, when were you going to tell me?" The 2 men looked at Min Jae. He said in Korean something short and flat that meant, "Give us the room." They left. The door closed. Min Jae stood. He had clearly not slept either. There were edges to him that weren't usually visible, a tightness around the jaw, something in the way he was holding his shoulders that said the night had cost him something. She filed that away and didn't let it soften her. "I received confirmation at 3 this morning," he said. "I was going to come to you at a reasonable hour with verified information. Someone texted me at 2:17 before your confirmation." She held out her phone, the message visible on the screen. "Unknown number. Someone in your organization or connected to it knew before you told me, or told me before you could. Which is it?" He looked at the phone. His jaw tightened. He took the phone from her hand. She let him, and looked at the message for a long moment. Then he set it on the desk. "How did he die?" she said. "His heart." He was 51 years old. 51-year-old men die of cardiac events. When they're under severe stress, or when someone helps them. She watched his face. Was it natural? The Atlantic City medical examiner has ruled it natural. That's not what I asked. He looked at her for a long time. The room was very quiet. She could hear the river somewhere far below the grounds, or maybe she was imagining it, the sound of water moving regardless of what happened on the shore. "I don't know yet," he said, and this time she believed him. She nodded. She picked up her phone from the desk. She turned to go. "Amara." It was the first time he had used her first name. She stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," he said. "He was still your father." She stood there in the silence of that for a moment. Her chest did something complicated that she did not permit to reach her face. "Yes," she said. "He was." She opened the door. "Find out who sent that text." She went back upstairs, sat at her desk, and for exactly 90 seconds she let herself feel the specific grief of losing someone you had already been grieving for years. The grief of a man who had been leaving in increments for so long that his actual departure felt less like a door slamming and more like the last light going out in a room you'd stopped entering. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. She found the discrepancy on a Wednesday, 3 days after her father's death, deep inside a set of financial records she should not have had access to. She had not stolen them. That was the thing she kept turning over because it mattered. Not morally. She was past the point where her moral inventory had room for fine distinctions, but practically, because how she had gotten them would determine what she could do with them. Min Jae had left her alone in the library for 2 hours on Tuesday evening. She had been working on a federal securities law paper, legitimately, using the library's materials. When she pulled the 1991 RICO case compendium from the third shelf, an unlocked folder had fallen out from behind it. Financial records. Han Syndicate internal accounts. She was certain they had not been placed there accidentally because nothing in this house happened accidentally. She was equally certain they had been placed there for her specifically because the folder was flagged with a small notation in Min Jae's handwriting, the same neat Korean characters she'd seen in the margins of the law books, that said simply, "Look at Q3 transfers, years 3 to 5. She had looked. The debt her father owed, but the original loan, the documented principal, was $8 million, not $10 million. The loan agreement she had signed had listed $10 million. with a notation attributing the additional $2 million to accumulated interest and administrative fees. She had accepted that. $10 million, $2 million in fees. Astronomical, but internally consistent with the kind of debt structure that organized crime lending typically used. Except the internal record showed no interest accrual on the principal for the first 6 months of the loan term. The $2 million hadn't grown. It had appeared, a lump sum addition to the ledger, entered on a Tuesday in October by a user code she traced through 3 layers of internal accounting notation to a set of initials. CSH Choi Seung-ho. She sat with that for a long time. She read the records again. Then she read them a third time, very slowly. The way you read something when you need to be absolutely certain you are not seeing what you want to see. She was not seeing what she wanted to see. The numbers were real. $2 million had been added to her father's debt by Min-jae's consigliere, with no authorization notation, no approval code, no corresponding entry in the operational expense ledger. The money had come from somewhere inside the organization. She could see where it had been drawn from, a logistics operational account. And it had been entered as debt principal on a loan that Min-jae almost certainly believed was legitimately $10 million. $2 million, moved by Choi Seung-ho, hidden inside a debt that had been used to acquire her. She closed the folder. She sat in the library for a very long time, breathing carefully, thinking about the architecture of what she was looking at, the shape of it. Choi had inflated the debt. Why inflate the debt? To make it more impossible to repay, to ensure that the only resolution available was the one that brought her into this house. But Choi didn't want her in this house. So inflating the debt served someone else's purpose. Park Tae-hyun. Min-jae had told her the loan was engineered. The goal was to give Park a reason to come after her. But what if the loan had been engineered from both sides? What if Choi had inflated the debt not to serve Min-jae's interests, but to serve Park's? To make the situation so extreme that Min-jae would act in a way that exposed vulnerabilities, made moves that could be anticipated, created a set of circumstances that Park could exploit? She pressed her fingers against her mouth and stared at the shelves. Choi was stealing from the organization. The $2 million wasn't just fraud. It was part of something larger, and whatever that larger thing was, it was connected to Park Tae-hyun, and it had been running for long enough that it had shaped the events that had brought her here. She needed to tell Min-jae. She needed to be very, very careful about how she told Min-jae. She was 3 steps from the library door when she heard voices in the corridor, and she stopped, because one of the voices was Choi's, and the other was a man she didn't recognize, and they were speaking in Korean with the cadence of people who believe themselves to be alone. She stood perfectly still and listened. She found the folder. The unknown voice, quiet and flat. I know. Choi, completely calm. Let her find it. If she takes it to him, she won't. Not yet. She's too careful. She'll verify first. She'll build a case. She'll want to be certain before she says a word. She's a lawyer. They can't help themselves. A pause. By the time she's certain, it won't matter. The operation moves Thursday. Yes. And the woman? A silence that lasted 4 seconds. Amara counted them. 4 seconds in which she stopped breathing entirely. She becomes a problem we address after Thursday, Choi said. Min-jae won't be in a position to protect her by then. Footsteps. Moving away. She pressed herself against the wall inside the library door and did not move until the sound was gone. Then she moved fast. She went up the back stairs, into her room, locked the deadbolt, and stood in the center of the floor trying to sequence what she had just understood. Thursday. Today was Tuesday. She had 36 hours, give or take, before whatever Choi was planning with Park Tae-hyun happened. She had financial records that proved Choi was stealing from the organization. She had an overheard conversation that proved Choi was actively working against Min-jae. And she had just heard herself described as a problem we address after Thursday. She also had no idea what Thursday meant, what the operation was, or how much of the organization Choi had already compromised. The question was whether to go to Min-jae now, with incomplete information, without the verification she would normally demand before walking into a conversation this consequential, or to wait, build the case, and risk running out of time. She thought about Choi's voice. She's too careful. She'll verify first. He had anticipated her instincts and built them into his timeline. He was counting on her to behave like a lawyer. She grabbed the financial folder and went to find Min Jae. He was in the main corridor, moving toward the east wing, toward her rooms, she realized, which meant he had been coming to her. They nearly ran into each other at the top of the main staircase. He looked at the folder in her hands and at her face, and she watched him make a rapid assessment. "Come with me," he said. "Your office isn't safe. Is there somewhere?" "Yes." He moved past her, back toward the west end of the second floor, a direction she hadn't been. She followed. He opened a door she'd thought was a closet, and it wasn't. It was a narrow staircase going up to the third floor, to a small room with no windows, and the particular blankness of a space that had been swept for listening devices on a regular basis. A table, 2 chairs, a light. He closed the door. They sat across from each other. She opened the folder and put it between them and laid it out in exactly the order she would have used in a legal presentation, because this was a legal presentation, the most important one she had ever given, with 36 hours on the clock. She talked for 11 minutes. She showed him the records, the entry codes, the initials, the transferred amount, the timeline. She told him what she'd overheard, word for word, in the order it happened. She watched his face the way you watch a structure for the first sign of fracture, because she needed to know whether the information broke something in him that couldn't be recovered, or whether it produced the kind of controlled, focused anger that could be directed. He listened without interrupting. That was one of the things she had begun to catalog about him. He did not interrupt. Most powerful men interrupted because they had spent their lives in rooms where everyone waited for them to speak, and the habit of talking over people became indistinguishable from breathing. Min Jae listened the way people listen when they learned early that information was more valuable than the sound of their own voice. When she finished, the room was quiet. He looked at the records. He looked at the initials CSH. He looked at them for a long time. "How certain are you," he said. "About the fraud? Completely. The records are your own internal accounts. About what I overheard. I speak fluent Korean, and I heard it clearly from 3 feet away. I'm certain." "Thursday." He said it flatly, like a word in a language that had just stopped meaning what it meant. "That's what he said." "What operation runs Thursday?" He wasn't asking her. He was thinking out loud, running through a catalog in his head that she didn't have access to, and she watched his face do the work of cross-referencing and arriving at something that landed badly. Something landed badly. She saw it. A precise tightening, a shift in the eyes, not panic. Min Jae didn't do panic, but the look of a man who has just understood the size of what's been in the room with him. "The South Korea shipment," he said. "Tell me." He looked at her. For a moment she thought he was going to make the mistake of deciding she didn't need to know, and she was already preparing the argument against it, but he said, "Every 3 months I take a small security team to oversee operations at the ancestral compound in the Gangwon province. I leave Thursday. I've done it every quarter for 6 years. Choi has always known the schedule." He stopped. "If he's moving with Park on Thursday, while I'm in transit, with a reduced team at this location, then this house is the target," she said. "Not the compound." He stood up. "Or both," she said, and he stopped. "If Park's people hit the compound while you're there, and Choi manages whatever happens here simultaneously, you can't respond to either fast enough to stop both." She looked at him. "You can't go to Korea." "If I don't go, Choi knows I've been warned. If you go, you walk into whatever Park has waiting for you." He put both hands on the table and looked at the documents. She could see him thinking, not strategizing, not yet, but doing the prior thing, the thing underneath strategy, acceptance, taking the full measure of what he was looking at. Choi Seong-ho, 11 years, the man who had managed the transition after his father died, who had been present at every critical decision, who knew every operational detail, every asset, every vulnerability, not just a traitor, the specific category of traitor who had been trusted with everything. "He's been feeding Park information for how long?" Min Jae said. "Based on the account patterns, I'd estimate at minimum 2 years, possibly 3. He straightened up. He walked to the far wall and stood there with his back to her for a moment, and she let him have that moment because she understood that some things needed a wall to absorb them before a person could turn around. When he turned around, his face was composed, closed, everything underneath locked down to a depth she couldn't measure. "I need to know," he said, "how much of my organization I still have." "How do you find that out without Choi knowing you're looking?" "That's the problem." She looked at the folder on the table. She thought about what she knew and what she didn't know, and the 36 hours sitting on top of all of it like a weight. She thought about Junior in New Jersey, who still thought he was visiting cousin Edna. She thought about Choi's voice in the corridor. She becomes a problem we address after Thursday. She looked up at Min-jae. "You trust Daijung?" "Completely." "Anyone else at that level?" "Two people. My chief of security on the Korea side, he's already at the compound, and Soo-yeon." Amara looked at him. "Soo-yeon. She was my mother's person, before everything else." He said it matter-of-factly, the way you state a foundational truth that has never been in question. She filed that. "Then you have three people and me." She picked up the folder. "And you have this, which means you have something Choi doesn't know you have." She looked at the documents and then at him. "He thinks I'm still in the library building a case. He thinks he has until Thursday before I'm ready to move. So we have roughly 30 hours before he realizes we're not where he expects us to be." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm telling you what the variables are." She put the folder down. "But I need you to answer a question, and I need you to answer it completely. What happened a long time ago that connects my father to your organization? You said his real name came up. I need to know what that means. Because my father is dead, and someone texted me the news from an unknown number, and Choi's $2 million addition to that debt is connected to whatever my father actually was. I can feel the shape of it, even if I can't see it clearly yet." Min-jae was quiet. "I'm not asking for background," she said. "I'm telling you that the thing you haven't told me yet is probably load-bearing for everything we're trying to figure out, and if it collapses, the whole structure comes down on both of us." She looked at him steadily. "You put those records in the library for me. You've been deciding how much to tell me since the first morning in the kitchen. I need you to stop deciding and just tell me." The room was very still. Min-jae sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment, and then he looked at her, and she saw something she hadn't seen from him before. Not vulnerability exactly, but the thing adjacent to it. The thing that happens when a person decides to stop managing what they show. "Your father's name," he said, "was not always Marcus Brooks." She went completely still. 23 years ago, a federal agent was embedded in my father's organization under a cover identity. He spent 4 years inside the Han Syndicate. He was one of the most effective undercover operatives the FBI ran in that decade. He held her gaze without looking away. "His real name was Marcus Brooks. He married your mother during the operation. You were born during the operation. When it ended, when he was extracted, the debt he left behind was part of his cover story, a fiction manufactured to explain his disappearance." The room was very quiet. "The original debt," she said slowly, "never existed." "No. My father was never a gambler who borrowed money from your family. He was a federal agent who infiltrated my father's organization and built a cover so complete that when he left, everyone believed the debt was real." He stopped. "Including me. Until 3 months ago, when Choi began acting in ways that didn't add up, and I started looking at everything from the beginning and found the original case file through a contact in federal records." She stared at him. The whole architecture, everything she had constructed to understand how she had ended up in this house, shifted underneath her like ground in an earthquake. Her father, the motor oil smell, the jerked chicken, the man who had carried her 6 blocks to the clinic on his back. He had not been a failed man who turned to gambling and borrowed money from criminals. He had been something else entirely, and the debt that had swallowed her whole life was a ghost. "Choi knows," she said. "Yes. Choi has known all along. He inflated the debt not just to steal money. He inflated it to activate it, to make it real enough that you would act on it, because as long as the debt existed, it could be used." She was talking fast now, the pieces connecting with the particular velocity of a mind that had been missing the central fact and suddenly has it. "Park needed leverage on you, Choi gave him the debt. But the debt was a fiction, so Choi had to make it real, which meant finding a way to make you believe it was legitimate, and my father... She stopped. Your father figured it out, Min-jae said. He contacted me 3 weeks before he died. He said he had evidence of what Choi had done, documentation that would expose the fraud and the connection to Park. He said he wanted to meet. He paused. I was cautious. I didn't trust him. I told him to wait. His jaw tightened. He died before I trusted him enough to meet. She looked at him. Her face felt very strange, the muscles in it doing things she was only partially controlling. You think Choi had him killed? I think a 51-year-old man with no cardiac history didn't die of natural causes in an Atlantic City hotel room 2 weeks after contacting me about evidence against my consigliere. The word father was somewhere in her chest doing something structural. She pushed it down. She pushed it all the way down, past the grief of it, past the revision of everything she had believed about Marcus Brooks and who he had been and why he had failed her, and she focused on the room and the man across the table and the 30 hours sitting on top of everything like a fuse. He had evidence, she said. He told you he had documentation. Where is it? I don't know. He had to have left it somewhere. A federal agent doesn't carry evidence like that without a dead man's switch. Somewhere it would surface if something happened to him. She thought. A safe deposit box. Federal records. Someone he trusted. Min-jae looked at her. Can you find it? She looked back at him. Her father's face floated somewhere at the edge of her vision. Not the hollowed-out version of the last decade, but something earlier, something she hadn't let herself remember in a long time. Big hands that smelled like motor oil. 6 blocks on his back to the clinic. A man who had spent 4 years undercover in the most dangerous criminal organization in New York, who had built a cover identity so complete it had outlasted him by 2 decades, who had died alone in an Atlantic City hotel room because he'd tried, finally, to undo the thing he'd set in motion. She owed him nothing. She owed him everything. She wasn't sure the distinction mattered anymore. Yes, she said, I can find it. She stood up. But we have 30 hours and Choi already knows where I am. And if he's watching this house, then we have less time than that. She looked at Min-jae. Whatever we do next, we do it tonight. He stood. For a moment they were both standing on the same side of the table, looking at each other, and she was acutely aware of the distance between them. Not close, not far. Exactly the distance of people who have stopped pretending they're not in the same situation. You didn't have to come to me, he said. You could have taken the records and found a way to use them independently. Exposed Choi without involving me. Gotten out. She looked at him steadily. Your organization's traitor had my father killed. I'm not getting out. She moved toward the door. I'm getting even. She put her hand on the door handle and pulled, and the narrow staircase beyond it was dark, and somewhere in the house below them, Choi Seung-ho was making his calculations about Thursday, and 30 miles away in New Jersey, her brother Junior was probably asking about Wi-Fi, and the Hudson was moving south outside the gray stone walls, and Amara Brooks, 23 years old, daughter of a federal agent she hadn't known she had, stood at the top of a staircase and understood with complete clarity that she had just crossed into territory where the law she had been studying her whole life could not entirely follow her. They moved in the next 4 hours with the particular efficiency of people who understand that speed and silence are the same thing. Min-jae found Dae-jung first, pulled him into the windowless room on the 3rd floor, and told him everything in under 6 minutes. Amara watched Dae-jung's face during those 6 minutes, watched him absorb the information about Choi the way you watch a man absorb a blow he didn't see coming, the initial flinch, the recalibration, and then the thing that came after, which in Dae-jung's case was a cold and specific fury that settled into his eyes and stayed there. How many of the security rotation can you trust absolutely? Min-jae said. 4, maybe 5. Dae-jung's voice was flat. Choi has been in the hiring conversations for the last 2 years. Anyone brought on in that window is compromised or might be. Assume might be. Min-jae looked at Amara. We work with 4. 5, Dae-jung said. I'll vouch for the 5th with my life. Then 5. Su-yeon was next. She came into the room and looked at Amara first, which Amara noted, and then she listened to Min-jae with her hands folded in front of her, and her face doing the same thing Dae-jung's had done. The blow, the recalibration. Except that underneath Su-yeon's version, there was something that looked like recognition, like a thing she had been waiting to be confirmed. "You knew something was wrong," Amara said. Su-yeon looked at her. "I knew the house felt different since October." She paused. "I didn't know what to do with that." "You're doing it now," Amara said. "We need you to keep your routine exactly as it is. Nothing changes in how you move through this house tonight. If Choi or anyone connected to him is watching staff behavior, they need to see normal." Su-yeon nodded once. She left. The door closed. Min-jae looked at Amara. "You said you could find the evidence your father left." "I said I could find it. I didn't say it would be easy." She pulled out her phone. "My father was an undercover federal operative. He would have used federal infrastructure for any dead man's switch, not a personal bank account, not anything that could be accessed through his civilian identity. He would have used a federal safe deposit arrangement or a secured evidence locker tied to his original case file." She was already moving through her contacts. "I need to make a call." "To who?" "A professor at Columbia. Federal criminal procedure. She spent 12 years as a DOJ attorney before she started teaching." She looked up. "I need someone who knows how legacy undercover asset accounts work, and I need them to not ask too many questions." "Can she do that?" "She can if I ask her correctly." She stepped into the corner of the room and called Professor Diane Okafor at 11:40 at night, and Diane picked up because Diane was the kind of person who kept her phone on full volume and answered it at any hour for students she believed in, which was one of the reasons Amara had chosen her. "Amara, it's late." "I know, I need a hypothetical." She kept her voice even. "If a federal undercover operative from the early 2000s had secured documentation relating to an active case, documentation he wanted to surface in the event of his death, what mechanism would he most likely have used through the DOJ infrastructure of that period?" A silence. Diane was not a woman who required extensive context before she shifted gears. Legacy period, pre-2005, the standard mechanism was a sealed supplemental filing attached to the original case number, held in the Federal Records Facility in Lower Manhattan, Room 4C, accessible only by the case number and the operative's federal identification. A pause. "This isn't a hypothetical. It's a hypothetical with time-sensitive implications. The case number would be on the original operation file. The federal identification would have been retired when the operative's cover was terminated, but the physical credential, the card itself, would have been issued to the operative as a matter of protocol. They kept them." Another pause. "Amara, are you safe?" "I'm working on it." "Do you need me to?" "No, thank you, Diane. I mean it." She hung up. She turned back to Min-jae. "Federal Records Facility in Lower Manhattan. My father would have had a physical credential from his operative period, and he would have kept it. He kept everything. I know that about him, at least. He was a person who kept things." She thought about the motor oil smell, the way his apartment always had boxes along the walls that never got unpacked. "I need to get into his apartment in the Bronx." "The Bronx is exposed." "I know." "If Choi has people watching." "I know." She looked at him. "What's the alternative? We have the financial records. We have what I overheard. That's enough to damage Choi inside the organization, but it's not enough to connect him to Park. It's not enough to prove what happened to my father. And it's not enough to protect us long-term from whatever Thursday is supposed to accomplish." She held his gaze. "We need the original case file. We need what my father found, and we need it before Thursday, which means we need it tonight." Min-jae was quiet for 4 seconds. She had started counting his silences. The 2-second ones meant he was deciding something small. The 4-second ones meant he had already decided and was working out the consequences. "I go with you, he said. "You go with me and we take Dae-jung and one other, small. Visible security draws attention." She paused. "And we don't go in the estate vehicles. Choi knows every car in this fleet." Dae-jung appeared in the doorway. He had a phone in his hand. We have a problem. One more or a new one? Amara said. New one. Park's people were spotted 40 minutes ago near the Columbia campus. 2 vehicles sitting on Amsterdam Avenue. He looked at Minjae. They're not watching the campus. They're watching for her. Amara felt it in her sternum. Not fear, or not only fear, but the particular sensation of a timeline compressing. They had moved Thursday up, or Troy had told them she'd found something and they were accelerating. Junior, she said. She had her phone out before the word finished leaving her mouth. Her grandmother answered on the second ring, and Amara said, without preamble, Grandma, I need you to take Junior and go somewhere you haven't told anyone about. Tonight. Not tomorrow morning, tonight. Right now, while I'm on the phone, I need you to start moving. Baby, it's midnight. I know. I'm sorry. Please. She heard the thing in her own voice that she almost never let through, and apparently her grandmother heard it too because there was a shift on the other end. Reverend Thomas's son has a place in Pennsylvania, her grandmother said quietly. He gave me the key last summer for emergencies. Go there. Don't use your credit cards after you leave the New Jersey house. Take cash from the envelope I sent you. Don't call me until I call you. Amara, I love you. Go. She hung up. Her hands were steady. Her chest was not, but her hands were. Minjae was watching her. She met his eyes and said, Let's go. They left the estate at 12:20 in a car Dae-jung had sourced from somewhere that had nothing to do with the Han Syndicate fleet. A dark blue Accord with Jersey plates and 60,000 miles on it. The kind of car that moved through the city without occupying any space in anyone's attention. Amara was in the passenger seat. Minjae was behind her. Dae-jung drove. The fifth man, whose name was Ryu and who moved with the compressed quiet of someone who had done serious things in small spaces, was in the back beside Minjae. The Bronx took 40 minutes. Her father's building on Morris Avenue was a 6th-floor walk-up with a front entrance that required a key code she still remembered because she had used it for 3 years of emergency visits. The code had not been changed. She noted that, filed it with a small, cold sadness, and pushed through. The apartment was on the 4th floor. She had her father's spare key on her keychain, had carried it for 2 years without thinking much about it. She put it in the lock and turned it, and the door swung open into the smell of him, motor oil and old paper and something underneath that was just Marcus Brooks, the particular human smell of a person that you recognize before you understand why. The smell that hits you when you've been holding yourself together and suddenly there's nowhere to put it. She walked in. She did not stop moving. She went through the apartment with her phone's flashlight. Dae-jung had confirmed no one on the exterior. Ryu was in the stairwell. Minjae was behind her in the apartment. And she looked at the boxes along the walls, dozens of them, labeled in her father's handwriting. The credential wouldn't be in a labeled box. It would be somewhere that looked like nothing. She stood in the center of the apartment and thought about her father. Not who she'd believed him to be, but who he actually was. A man trained to hide things. A man who had built a false identity and lived inside it for 4 years. A man who, even after the operation ended, had never quite come back to himself. And maybe that was why, she thought, with a pain that arrived sharp and unexpected. Maybe that was why the gambling and the disappearing and the leaving had never made complete sense. You couldn't spend 4 years being someone else and come back entirely. Something stayed behind. She went to the kitchen. She opened every cabinet, not looking for the obvious, looking for the wrong thing, the thing that didn't belong. Her flashlight moved across canned goods, dishes, a coffee maker that was too good for the apartment, cleaning supplies under the sink. Under the sink, behind the cleaning supplies, taped to the back wall of the cabinet, a small metal box the size of a large wallet. She pulled it free. It was locked with a combination she did not know. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. The case number, Minjae said from the doorway. He was keeping his voice low, barely above a breath. You said the federal records need the case number and the credential. The combination might be the case number. She looked at the box. Federal case numbers from that period were 8 digits. The lock had 8 digits. She thought about her father, the way he constructed things, the particular logic of a man trained in operational security. He wouldn't use a number that existed only in federal files. He would use something he could remember without writing down. Something that existed in 2 places, the federal record and his own memory. She looked at the box for 10 seconds. Then she looked at her phone. Then she dialed her own birthday into the combination. The lock opened. Inside, a federal operative credential card, 23 years old, laminated with her father's photograph at 32 looking young and very serious. And beneath it, a single index card with a case number written in his handwriting, 8 digits, and beneath the number, 2 words in quotation marks. For Amara. She sat on the kitchen floor with the box in her hands and the credential card and the index card, and the pain moved through her like weather. Fast, total, gone. She gave herself 5 seconds, then she stood up. I have it, she said. They were back in the car within 6 minutes of entering the building. Dae-jung pulled onto the Grand Concourse and headed south, and Amara was already texting Diane Okafor the case number with a message that said, Federal Records Facility, Lower Manhattan, Room 4C, first thing tomorrow. I need you there. I'll explain everything. Diane texted back in under a minute. 7 a.m. I'll be there. The car was quiet for a moment. Then Min Jae's phone vibrated. He looked at it, and she felt the shift in the atmosphere before he said a word. The particular quality of a silence that means something has just gotten worse. Choi called the Korea compound, he said, 20 minutes ago. He told my security chief there that I'm flying out tomorrow morning instead of Thursday. Pre-moved the departure. He looked up from the phone. He's accelerating everything. If my chief at the compound receives me tomorrow morning expecting me to arrive, and I don't arrive, he'll know something is wrong and there's no one to tell him what to do, Amara said. Or Choi will call him with an explanation, which means Choi controls the compound's response. Can you reach your chief directly without going through any channel Choi has access to? There's a frequency. Old. We used it when my father was alive. He was already moving, reaching for a second phone she hadn't seen him carry before. A basic device, no internet, the kind of phone that was invisible to modern surveillance because it was too simple to be worth looking at. He dialed, waited. 6 rings. The call connected. The conversation was in Korean, fast and low, and Amara listened. Min Jae told his chief, a man named Sung, she gathered, from the name Min Jae used once, that the schedule had changed, that he was not coming, that Sung needed to secure the compound and trust no communication that came through the standard channels until he heard from Min Jae again on this frequency. Sung asked 2 short questions. Min Jae answered them. The call lasted 90 seconds. He put the phone in his pocket. Sung is solid. The compound is secured? For now. He paused. Park still has resources. If he's already deployed people toward Gangwon province expecting my arrival, Sung is walking into... Dae-jung said sharply, car behind us. The quality of those words, flat, immediate, carrying the particular information density of someone who doesn't say things like that unless they mean exactly what they mean, hit the air in the car like a stone into still water. Amara turned. Through the rear window, in the ambient light of the Bronx at 12:50 in the morning, a dark SUV, 3 car lengths back, matching their speed on the Grand Concourse. How long? Min Jae said. Since Morris Avenue, Dae-jung said. I wasn't certain until now. The car was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then everything happened fast. Dae-jung took a left without signaling, hard enough that Amara's shoulder hit the door. The SUV took the same left. He accelerated, moved through a yellow light, took another turn, and Amara gripped the door handle and watched the side mirror, and the SUV stayed with them through both turns with a smoothness that meant the driver had done this before. 2 vehicles, Ryu said from the back. His voice was completely calm. The second one just picked us up at the corner of 167th. They boxed us in, Min Jae said, not alarmed, analyzing. They let us go to the apartment. They waited. They wanted to see if I'd find something, Amara said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. If I left empty-handed, they had nothing. If I left with the box, she looked at the metal box in her lap. They know what it is. Dae-jung pushed the car through a gap in traffic that wasn't quite a gap, and something that was probably a side mirror took the toll of it. The engine noise changed. The city blurred past the windows. Min Jae reached forward and put his hand on her headrest. Not touching her, just present. The Federal Records Facility, he said. If we go there now, it doesn't open until 7. She was thinking fast. And if we lead these vehicles to the facility, they'll know exactly where the evidence is stored before we can access it. Where do we go? She looked at the box in her lap. She looked at the credential card inside. She thought about the shape of the problem, where they could go that Choi's people hadn't anticipated, where they could hold until 7 in the morning, where Park's SUVs couldn't box them without drawing the one kind of attention that organized crime universally avoided. The legal clinic, she said. Downtown. I have a key. It's a nonprofit legal services office in a building that has 24-hour security on the lobby, cameras on every floor, and a location 2 blocks from the first precinct. She looked at Dai Jung. They will not follow us into a building with a police precinct 2 blocks away. They can't afford that. Dai Jung looked at Min Jae in the rear view. Min Jae said, "Go." The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. Dai Jung drove like someone who understood the geometry of a city the way a surgeon understands a body. Precisely, without sentiment, finding the paths that bought time without creating catastrophe. They lost the second SUV somewhere in Harlem. The first one stayed with them, farther back now, cautious. When they crossed into Midtown, the trailing vehicle fell further behind, and then, 2 blocks from the clinic building, it was gone. She didn't believe it was gone. She believed it had stopped where it was comfortable and was waiting. They went into the building. The lobby security guard recognized her. She had worked here every week for a year. The man's name was Gerald. He was 62 and liked to talk about his grandchildren. And she smiled at Gerald and said she needed to get some materials for a morning hearing, and Gerald nodded and buzzed them through. And in the elevator going up to the 4th floor, she realized her hands had finally started shaking. She looked at them. She made them stop. The way she had always made things stop that she couldn't afford to show, through a combination of focus and something that might have been stubbornness if you were being unkind about it. The clinic was dark and empty. She unlocked it with her key card, and they went in, and Dai Jung checked every room in 30 seconds and then posted himself by the door, and Ryu found a position by the window that gave him a sight line to the street below. Min Jae looked at her in the dimness. "You're shaking." "I'm not anymore." He looked at her hands. "You were." Everyone was something earlier tonight. She set the box on one of the clinic desks and opened it again and took out the credential and the index card. "We need to hold until 7. 4 hours. Then Diane meets us at the federal facility. We access the sealed filing with this credential and this case number, and we have everything my father gathered." She paused. "After that, we have enough to destroy Choi's position completely. Financial fraud, conspiracy with a rival organization, probable responsibility for my father's death. Enough to move." And Park. Park's coordination with Choi becomes visible the moment Choi falls. His network loses its inside access. She looked at Min Jae. "But it has to be tonight. After we have the file, we move immediately. We don't wait." He nodded. He pulled a chair from one of the desks and sat down and looked at the floor, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked tired. Genuinely, physically tired. The kind that comes from a night of absorbing information that has restructured everything you believed about people you trusted. She sat down across from him. They were quiet for a moment. The city moved outside, indifferent. "Choi told me," Min Jae said, without looking up. "When my father died, he was the first one in the room. He was the one who told me. He sat across from me and he explained what had happened, and he stopped, jaw tight. He was very kind about it." She looked at him. She did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would fit inside that sentence without diminishing it. "I trusted him with everything," he said. "I know." 11 years. "I know." She paused. "My father spent 4 years inside your family's organization. He learned everything there was to know about it. He did it because it was his job, and when his job ended, he left and took everything he knew with him, and he spent the rest of his life as someone who could never quite be who he actually was." She looked at the credential card on the desk. "Betrayal is the shape this world runs on, yours and mine both. The question is what you do after you find out the shape of it." He looked at her. In the low light of the empty clinic, with the city outside and Dai Jung at the door, and the credential card lying between them like a document from another life, he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Stripped of all the architecture of control, all the careful management, just looking. "What do you do?" he said. "You find the evidence," she said, "and then you end it." At 3 in the morning, Ryu said quietly from the window, "Movement on the street. 2 men. They're not moving toward the building, but they're not moving away." Daijung was already at the window. "They're holding a perimeter." Min-jae stood. Amara stood. 4 hours until 7. 4 hours until the federal facility opened, and Diane Okafor would be standing outside it with the legal authority and institutional access to get them inside. 4 hours in a room, 2 blocks from a police precinct with Park Tae-hyun's people holding the street below, and Choi Seung-ho presumably aware by now that his timeline had been disrupted and his surveillance burned. Amara looked at the credential card and the index card with her name on it. Then she looked at Min-jae. "They'll move before 7, she said. "They can't afford to wait. Choi knows we found the folder. He knows we know about Thursday. If we reach that federal facility, they'll try to stop us before we get there." Min-jae was already moving toward Dae-jung. Options. Dae-jung said, "The building has a service exit on the east side, opens onto a delivery alley. If we move before they tighten the perimeter," a sound, not from the street, from the building. Below them, from the stairwell. All 4 of them went still at the same time. Ryu was at the clinic door in 3 steps, pressing himself against the wall beside it. Dae-jung had a weapon in his hand that Amara had not seen him produce. Min-jae stepped in front of her by reflex, and she stepped around him by reflex, and they both stopped and looked at each other in the near dark, and she said very quietly, "Don't do that." He held her gaze for 1 second. Then he moved to the side rather than in front. The sound in the stairwell was footsteps, more than one person, moving carefully, which meant they weren't building security because building security didn't move carefully. Building security moved with the loud confidence of people who belonged. Ryu looked at Min-jae. Min-jae made a gesture that was small and specific, and Ryu understood it in the way that men understand a language built from years of operating together in exactly these circumstances. The door to the clinic was locked. It would take them 30 seconds to get through it. 30 seconds. Amara looked at the desk where the credential card and the index card were lying, and she picked them up and put them inside her jacket against her chest. In the same motion, she picked up the empty metal box and put it in the desk drawer. Because if they were about to be overwhelmed, she wanted those pieces of paper against her body, and she wanted any search to find a conspicuously empty container. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Silence. Min-jae was absolutely still, and in that stillness, she could see him calculating. The geometry of the room, the number of people outside, what Dae-jung and Ryu could manage against an unknown quantity, what the cost-benefit looked like for the next 60 seconds. And she watched his eyes, and she thought, "We don't have enough people, and he knows it, and he is not going to let them take those documents, even if it means." A phone buzzed. Min-jae's. He looked at it. His face did something she hadn't seen it do before. He showed her the screen. A message from the old frequency. Sung's frequency, from Korea. 7 words in Korean that she translated instantly. Park's men are already at the compound. And below it, 8 seconds later, a second message. They brought enough for a war. The footsteps outside the door resumed, and below them on the street, the 2 men Ryu had spotted became 4, as a third vehicle pulled to the curb, and Amara Brooks stood in the dark of a legal aid clinic in Lower Manhattan with her dead father's federal credential pressed against her chest, and understood that whatever she had thought the shape of this was, the actual shape was larger, and it was closing in from every direction at once. Min-jae made the decision in the time it takes to exhale. "Service exit," he said. "Now." Ryu was already moving. Dae-jung peeled away from the door, and they crossed the clinic in the dark, past the desks and the filing cabinets and the photographs of clients the clinic had helped over the years. Ordinary people with ordinary disasters. The kind of disasters that didn't follow you into legal aid offices at 3 in the morning with armed men outside the door. Amara moved with them, not behind them, alongside. Her hand pressed flat against her jacket, where the credential card and the index card were tucked against her sternum. The service corridor behind the clinic kitchen was narrow and smelled like old coffee and cleaning solvent. Ryu went first, then Amara, then Min-jae, Then Jung pulling the door shut behind them with the careful silence of someone who understands that the sound of a closing door can be the last sound you make. The service stairs were concrete, unpainted, the kind of utilitarian infrastructure that exists in every building and is noticed by no one. They went down fast and quiet, one flight, two, and Amara's hand found the railing and her feet found the rhythm, and she focused on the space between the back of Ryu's jacket and the next landing, and she did not think about what was happening in the stairwell above them. The service exit opened onto a delivery alley between the clinic building and the parking structure to the east. Cold air hit her face. November, deep into it now, the kind of cold that has made up its mind. The alley was empty. 40 feet of it, and then the street. Ryu checked the alley mouth, held up a fist, stopped. They all stopped. Amara pressed herself against the wall behind Ryu and looked past his shoulder. At the alley mouth across the street, she could see the edge of one of Park's vehicles, a dark shape, idling, exhaust visible in the cold air, positioned to watch the building's east face, not positioned to watch the alley. Ryu looked back at Min-jae. Min-jae looked at the vehicle. He looked at Jung. Something passed between them in the silent language of men who have operated together in bad situations. And then Jung moved to Ryu's shoulder, and they did something coordinated and fast that Amara categorized only in retrospect. A split, Jung going left toward the alley mouth, while Ryu came back to flank her and Min-jae. And then Jung walked out of the alley mouth onto the sidewalk with the particular confidence of a man who belongs wherever he is. And the vehicle's attention shifted toward him, and Min-jae said very quietly in her ear, "Cross now." And his hand was at her back, not grabbing, just present, and she crossed. 40 feet of open alley, the cold on her face, her breath in the air in front of her, the sound of her own footsteps, which she was trying to minimize and mostly succeeding, the vehicle exhaust in her peripheral vision, Ryu beside her and Min-jae behind her and the far side of the alley arriving, and then they were through into the shadow of the parking structure, and Jung came off the sidewalk 30 seconds later from a different angle, and none of Park's men had moved. A black sedan was waiting on the far side of the parking structure. A driver Amara hadn't seen before, another of Jung's verified 5. They got in and they drove. She sat in the back between Ryu and Min-jae, and she let her head fall back against the seat, and she breathed for the first time in what felt like an hour. The credential card and the index card were still against her chest. She could feel them. "Where?" the driver said. Min-jae looked at Amara. She looked at the clock on the dash, 3:47 in the morning. "We wait," she said. "Somewhere they can't find us in 3 hours." "I have a place, but," Jung said from the front. The place turned out to be a storage unit in Long Island City that Jung had rented under a name that had nothing to do with him or the Han Syndicate, paid 3 years in advance, visited twice. It was heated, which was the most important thing, and it contained 2 folding chairs, a work table, and a case of water that was probably 18 months old. Amara drank one of the waters and sat in one of the folding chairs and looked at her phone. Nothing from her grandmother. That was good. That was the right nothing. She thought about the message from Sung. They brought enough for a war. Park's people were at the compound in Gangwon province, and if Min-jae didn't arrive tomorrow morning as Choi had told Sung to expect, Sung was holding a mountain compound with whatever security he had against whatever Park had brought, and the math of that was not good math. "Sung," she said. Min-jae was on the old frequency phone. "I've been trying to reach him for 20 minutes. Is he not answering, or is the call not connecting?" A pause. Not connecting. She processed that. If the call wasn't connecting, it meant either the frequency was being jammed, which required hardware and intent, which meant Park had come prepared, or Sung had gone dark voluntarily, which meant he'd seen enough to know that silence was safer than communication. Either way, the compound was isolated. She looked at Min-jae. He was looking at the phone in his hand with an expression she recognized, the specific face of a person calculating how many fronts they can hold simultaneously and arriving at a number smaller than the number of fronts that exist. "Tell me about the compound," she said. He looked up. "Why?" Because I'm trying to understand the whole shape of it. If Park hits the compound and Choi manages whatever he's managing here, what is the objective? Not the intermediate objective, the end objective. What does Park gain if both operations succeed? Min-jae was quiet. Control of the Eastern Network. The compound in Gangwon holds the ancestral documentation of the Han organization, land records, business charters, the original agreements that give the family legal authority over the legitimate operations. If Park takes the compound and holds those documents, and simultaneously removes me, he stopped. He becomes the legal heir, effectively, through forgery and the absence of any living Han leadership to contest it. She looked at him. He's not trying to defeat you. He's trying to replace you. She turned that over. And Choi facilitated it from the inside because Park offered him what I never would. Independence. His own operation carved out of the Eastern Network, answerable to Park rather than to me. Min-jae said it flatly, without heat, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. He didn't want to destroy the organization. He wanted to inherit a piece of it. She sat with that. Then she said, "The compound, is it defensible?" My father built it on a ridge in the Taebaek Mountains. One access road. The main structure is stone, 17th century, reinforced 3 times since. It was designed, literally, to be held against siege. He paused. If Sung has the sense to lock it down and wait, Park cannot take it quickly. It would take days of sustained effort, and it would make noise. The kind of noise that reaches people outside the organization. Then Sung is the clock, she said. As long as he holds the compound, Park's window is closing. Every hour he waits exposes him. She looked at the credential card on the work table. And if we get into that federal facility at 7 and retrieve what my father left, we have the documentation to destroy Choi's position completely, which unravels the inside access, which leaves Park exposed on both ends. If we get in at 7, we're going to get in at 7. She said it with the particular certainty she reserved for things she had already decided were not optional. And Min-jae looked at her across the work table in the fluorescent light of a storage unit in Long Island City, and something in his face did the thing it had started doing recently. The thing she had no name for yet. That wasn't softness exactly, but was the direction of softness, the movement toward it. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I won't." "Neither will I." She looked at the credential card. "Talk to me about your father." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Why?" "Because I've been thinking about mine all night, and I need to put it somewhere else for a while." She looked at him. "And because whatever happened between your father and mine, whatever the original operation was, it's the thing underneath everything. I want to understand it." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "My father came to this country in 1981. He had $40 and a contact in Queens who owed him a favor. He built something from nothing, which is the version of the story I was told growing up. And it's true. But what it leaves out is what something means." He looked at the wall of the storage unit. "He was not a good man. He did things that I inherited the consequences of and spent 11 years trying to either manage or dismantle, depending on which thing was possible. He was also the person who taught me to read, who sat with me every night until I was 10 years old and went through whatever I was studying and asked me questions until I could answer them without looking at the page. Those two things existed in the same person." He paused. "I think your father was probably the same." She thought about it. Motor oil and federal credentials, jerk chicken and 4 years of lying to everyone he met. "Yeah," she said, "probably." They sat in silence for a while, and it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced since before she could remember, which was its own kind of information. At 6:15, she stood up, put the credential card and the index card back inside her jacket, and said, "Let's go." Diane Okafor was standing outside the Federal Records facility on Worth Street at 6:58, wearing a coat that looked like it had been grabbed in the dark, carrying a coffee in each hand. She held one out to Amara without a word. Amara took it. "You look terrible," Diane said. "I know." Diane looked at Min-jae, at Daijung, at Ryu. She looked back at Amara. "Is this the kind of situation where I should ask questions or the kind where I do the thing and ask questions later? Later, Amara said. Significantly later. Inside, Diane's DOJ credentials and her institutional knowledge of how legacy case files were stored moved them through the Federal Records Facility's administrative layer in under 12 minutes. Room 4C was exactly what it sounded like. A room, not large, with numbered access panels along 3 walls, each one keyed to a specific case number and a specific credential. Amara found panel 7413. She put her father's credential card against the reader. The light went from red to green. The panel opened. Inside, a sealed manila envelope, the kind that federal offices used in the early 2000s. Thick brown paper with a tamper-evident seal that was still intact. Her name was written on the front in her father's handwriting. Amara Denise Brooks. Open when you're ready. She stood there looking at it. Diane was very quiet beside her. Min-jae was behind her, far enough to give her room, close enough that she could hear him breathe. She picked up the envelope and held it in both hands and felt the weight of it, which was heavier than paper and lighter than everything it actually contained, and she thought, he knew I would be the one to come for this. Not a federal contact, not a lawyer he trusted, not anyone from his former life. He had written her name on it because he had always known, probably from the moment he understood that Choi had fabricated the debt and set the machinery in motion, that Amara would be the one who figured it out and came. She broke the seal. She read. She read for 11 minutes, standing in room 4C, while Diane read over her shoulder and Min-jae waited and the fluorescent lights buzzed above them. The envelope contained a 14-page sworn affidavit from Marcus Brooks, former Federal Bureau of Investigation, undercover operative, case designation Easterntide, detailing in precise and legally formatted language everything Choi Seong-ho had done over a period of approximately 3 years. The inflation of the debt, the transfer of $2 million, the coordination with Park Tae-hyun, the flow of operational intelligence from the Han Syndicate to the Daesong Network, and at the end, 4 pages of financial documentation that her father had obtained from a source he named only as an inside contact who is no longer living. Documentation that showed the full scope of Choi's embezzlement, not just the $2 million from the debt, but an additional $9 million moved through the logistics operational accounts over 36 months. $11 million. 3 years. Hidden inside the legitimate business infrastructure of an organization that trusted him with everything. And the last page of the affidavit, handwritten rather than typed, a single paragraph in her father's careful printing. I spent 4 years inside the Han organization because it was my job. I left because I had to. The debt I left behind was always fictional, a cover story that became a weapon in someone else's hands years after I stopped being responsible for it. The man I chose to hurt by leaving was Han Kang-seok, who ran that organization then and whose son runs it now. I am sorry for that. I am not sorry for surviving. I hope my daughter can say the same. Marcus. She stood with the page in her hands for a long moment. Then she handed it to Min-jae. He read it. She watched his face while he read it. She watched him reach the last paragraph and stay on it for longer than it took to read it once. He looked up. The debt was always fictional, he said. Not accusing, processing. Yes. Which means I had no legitimate claim on you. The arrangement we made was based on a debt that didn't exist. Legally, ethically, completely. She held his gaze. I know. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that was complicated and that she let move without trying to interpret it too quickly. You could have used this to walk away the moment you opened it, he said. I know. Why didn't you? She thought about how to answer that honestly. Because Choi had my father killed. Because Park Tae-hyun has men in a mountain compound in Korea right now trying to steal your family's legacy. Because walking away doesn't make any of that stop. It just means I'm not in the room when it gets resolved. She paused. And because it stopped being about the debt a while ago. Diane, who had been reading over Min-jae's shoulder, cleared her throat. This affidavit is a federal document. If it gets filed with the right people, it takes the criminal infrastructure component off the table, The embezzlement, the inter-organization coordination, all of it becomes federal jurisdiction, not something that gets resolved by, she looked at the assembled company, other means. Which is exactly what we need, Amara said. It goes to the FBI Financial Crimes Division and the Organized Crime Task Force simultaneously. Once it's in federal hands, Choi loses every tool he has. He can't disappear documents that are already in a federal proceeding. He can't use his position inside the organization to manage the narrative. She looked at Diane. Will you file it? Diane looked at the affidavit. She looked at Amara. I spent 12 years at DOJ specifically dealing with cases like this one, she said. Yes, I'll file it. A pause. It'll take a few hours to get to the right people. We need it filed before noon, Amara said. By noon, Choi needs to know that the federal proceeding exists because once he knows, he can't move against Min Jae's organization without it looking like obstruction on top of everything else. I can do that. Diane looked at her with the expression of someone who has just recalibrated who they thought they were talking to. Amara, when this is over, I know, I'll explain everything. She almost smiled. There's a lot to explain. They were back in the car when Min Jae's old frequency phone connected. Sung's voice came through thinned by distance and what sounded like wind, and he was speaking fast. The Korean compressed with urgency, and Amara translated in real time for herself while Min Jae spoke back. Park had brought 12 men to the compound access road. They had arrived at 4 in the morning and set up a position there. They hadn't moved against the compound itself yet. Sung's count of the defensive positions and the structure's inherent advantages had apparently given them pause. But they were waiting. And they had a vehicle mounted with something Sung described as serious hardware, which was the phrase Sung used when he was being careful about what he said over a frequency he wasn't certain was secure. Min Jae said something short and specific into the phone. Sung responded. Min Jae hung up. He's holding, Min Jae said. How long can he hold? Days, potentially. The compound has provisions, water. The access road is the only approach, and it's narrow. It's 1 vehicle wide and has 2 natural choke points. He paused. But 12 men with serious hardware and enough patience can hold a perimeter indefinitely. Sung can't go anywhere. And eventually Choi reaches him through a channel Sung trusts and tells him something that changes his calculation. She looked at Min Jae. We need to end this before that happens. Choi is still in the estate. Is he? Min Jae checked his phone, the regular one. A message from Soo Yeon, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. Director C left the property at 0545. Vehicle heading toward the city. He showed Amara the message. She thought, he knows we got out of the clinic building. He knows we have the credential. He's moving because he's not going to sit and wait for it to land on him. She looked at Min Jae. Where does he go when he runs? He has a property in New Jersey, residential, quiet, registered to a holding company 3 layers removed from his name. He paused. I've known about it for 4 years. I never told him I knew. Can Dae-jung get people there? From the front seat, Dae-jung said, already moving. I texted the moment he left the estate. She looked at the back of Dae-jung's head with something that approached affection. He had anticipated the move before she'd finished the sentence. She understood now why Min Jae trusted him. What about Park's people in the city? She said. The vehicles from last night. Gone, Ryu said from beside her. They pulled off when we went into the federal facility. Broad daylight, federal building, people coming and going. They weren't going to hold that position. They'll reconsolidate somewhere. Yes, but they don't have the affidavit. They don't know what we retrieved. Ryu said it with the particular quietness of someone who has been watching the board from the corner all night and sees things other people miss. Their information stops at 3 this morning. Anything we've done since then, they're working without. She nodded. She looked out the window at New York in the early morning. The city coming awake, coffee carts and delivery trucks and people moving with their heads down against the cold. The ordinary machinery of a day that had no idea what had been running through its middle, through the night. She felt the exhaustion now, the accumulated weight of it, pressing on the backs of her eyes. She pushed it down. Take me to the estate, she said. Min Jae looked at her. Why? Because Su Yan is there, because the financial documentation from the library folder is still there, because I need to make copies of everything in this envelope before Diane files the original, and I need a printer. She paused. And because I need to change my clothes and I've been wearing the same jacket for 11 hours. Min-jae said nothing for a moment. Then, to the driver, the estate. The estate in the clear morning light looked like something that had no connection to the night they had just lived through. The stone facade and the river visible beyond it, and the frost on the grounds, and everything quiet and exactly as it had been every morning she had seen it. She got out of the car and stood on the gravel and breathed the cold air and let herself feel, just for a moment, the strange sensation of arriving somewhere that had begun to feel like it was hers. Su-yeon met her at the door. She looked at Amara's face, then at Min-jae's, and she said nothing, which was the correct thing. "Is the house clean?" Min-jae said. "I went through every room after Director Choi left." "Yes." Su-yeon paused. He took very little with him. One bag. He didn't look frightened. He looked... She paused, finding the word finished, like someone who has decided they are done with a place. "He's not done," Amara said. "He's repositioning." She went inside. "I need the printer in the library." She spent 40 minutes in the library making copies of everything: the affidavit, the financial records, the credential card photocopied front and back, the index card. She put copies in 3 separate envelopes and gave one to Dae-jung to hold, sealed the second in the estate's fireproof document safe with Su-yeon as witness, and kept the third in her jacket. She sent Diane a secure message confirming the file was ready for transmission. At 9:47, Diane sent back, filed with EDNY Financial Crimes, copy to OC Task Force, confirmation numbers attached. It's in the system. Amara read the message twice. Then she set the phone face up on the library table and looked at it and thought, "Dad, it's done." She sat with that for exactly the amount of time it needed, which was not long but was real, and then she stood up. She found Min-jae in the study. He was on the phone with Sung. The connection was better now, clear, and from the doorway she could hear that the situation at the compound had changed. Park's vehicles had moved off the access road in the last 30 minutes. Not an assault, a withdrawal. Orderly, deliberate. Sung described it with the precise detail of a man who has been watching a threat retract and wants to be certain it's real before he says so. Min-jae looked at Amara in the doorway while he listened to Sung. She held up her phone, showing him the confirmation message from Diane. He understood immediately. He said something to Sung, listened briefly, and ended the call. "Park knows," Amara said. The moment that filing hit the federal system, someone in his network was watching for it. He knows the affidavit exists. He knows it's in federal hands. She looked at Min-jae. He's cutting his losses. The compound operation is over because holding it now creates exposure without any corresponding gain. Choi's inside access is burned. The documentation he needed to claim legal authority is never going to reach him, and he's got 12 men on a mountain in Korea that are now a liability. Min-jae put the frequency phone in his pocket. He'll go to ground. For a while, yes. She paused. But the federal case is open now. The financial crimes investigation will run its course, and it will pull on threads that lead to Park, as well as Choi. It won't be immediate, but it will be thorough. "Justice at the speed of federal process," he said. "It's the only kind that sticks." He looked at her. "And Choi?" Dae-jung appeared in the study doorway behind her. "New Jersey property. Our people have eyes on it. Choi is inside. He has one man with him. A driver." He paused. "No weapons visible. He's making phone calls, but they're going nowhere. His contact network is shutting down." He said it with a flatness that contained, underneath, a very old and controlled anger. He knows he's done. Min-jae looked at Dae-jung for a long moment. Something passed between them that Amara observed without inserting herself into. It was the kind of exchange that happens between people who have operated for years in a world where the resolution of betrayal did not traditionally involve federal filing systems, and who were making, in real time, a decision about which world they were in now. "Bring him in," Min-jae said. "No one touches him. He comes in and he answers for it in front of the organization. Then we turn over everything we have on him to the federal process. He paused. Cleanly. Dae-jung nodded. He left. Amara looked at Min-jae. That's the right call. I know. He looked at the window. It's also the harder one. Usually is. Choi Seung-ho arrived at the estate at 11:15. He came into the main room with Dae-jung on one side and Ryu on the other, and he looked diminished in the daylight. Smaller than his function, smaller than the space his betrayal had occupied. His suit was the same expensive one. His face had the specific quality she had noted when she first met him, pleased with itself. That quality was still there, which was either extraordinary composure or a complete failure to understand how thoroughly he had been dismantled, and she couldn't tell which. He looked at Amara first, then at Min-jae. Where is it? Min-jae said. Choi sat in the chair Dae-jung directed him to and looked at his own hands and said nothing. The evidence my father left doesn't need your confirmation, Amara said. It's already filed. The federal case is already open. She sat across from him. She made herself look at him directly because looking away would be a concession she wasn't willing to make. But there are things only you know. The inside contact who gave my father documentation, you had him killed too. Choi looked at her. You don't know that. I know my father wrote that his contact was no longer living. I know the timing. She held his gaze. I'm not asking for the federal record. I'm asking because he deserves to be named. A long silence. His name was Kim Woo-jin, Choi said. Quietly, almost carefully, like a thing he had been holding for a long time. He was a bookkeeper. He found the discrepancy in the accounts and made the mistake of coming to me about it. He stopped. That was 4 years ago. And my father. Your father contacted me 6 weeks ago. He told me what he had. He thought... A pause, something crossing his face that might have been the distant relative of regret. He thought I would be frightened enough to cooperate, to give him something additional in exchange for his silence. He looked at the table. He misjudged. He trusted that you still had something in you worth appealing to, Amara said. That was the misjudgment. Choi looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Min-jae. And in that look, in the specific quality of it, the thing underneath the performance, she saw it finally. Not the absence of remorse exactly, but the presence of something lonelier. A man who had made a decision years ago that cut him off from every room he had previously belonged to, and had been living in that severance ever since, maintaining the surface of belonging while the interior had been empty for years. You were his father's consigliere, Amar said. You were in the room when his father died. You told him. She watched his face. Did you arrange that too? A silence that lasted long enough to be its own answer. Min-jae had gone completely still. Not the stillness of someone managing themselves, the deeper stillness. He found the account discrepancies, Choi said finally. Han Kang-seok. He was old, but he was not. He was not easy to fool for long. He called me in and he had the records. He was going to expose everything. He stopped. I made a decision. The room was very quiet. Min-jae looked at Choi for a long time. The expression on his face was something Amar had never seen there, and hoped she would not have cause to see again. Not anger, past anger, something that lived in the territory beyond anger where things get very quiet and very final. Get him out of here, Min-jae said to Dae-jung. His voice was even. Completely even. The way a voice gets when the effort to keep it that way is enormous and invisible. Call the federal contact. He goes to them today. Dae-jung and Ryu moved. Choi stood without being told, which was the one thing about him in that room that she would later think showed a trace of the man he might originally have been before whatever calculation he had made 11 years ago had rerouted everything. He walked out without looking at either of them again. The room was empty except for Min-jae and Amara. He stood at the window with his back to her, and she watched his shoulders and the particular set of them, and she thought about his father and hers. Two men whose choices had made an enormous amount of wreckage, and the wreckage had landed here, in this room, in the two of them, and they were still standing. After a while, Min-jae turned around. His face was composed again. Not closed the way it used to be. Something was different in it. Some layer of the architecture had come down. And what was underneath it was more ordinary and more real. "He killed my father," he said. "Yes. For 11 years I thought it was natural. I thought it was just the end that was coming for him. I thought—" He stopped. "I know," she said. He looked at the window, at the river visible beyond the grounds. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to know today." She paused. "Or tomorrow. That kind of thing takes time to find a place for. In my experience, you just keep moving until one day there's somewhere to put it." He looked at her. "Your experience. You're 23 years old." "I've been moving since I was 14. She held his gaze. "I know what I'm talking about." Something in his face changed. The movement towards softness again, and this time it arrived. 3 weeks later, the federal indictment of Choi Seung-ho came through on a Tuesday morning. Amara read the filing at the kitchen table with her coffee, while Min-jae sat across from her with his own coffee and his own reading. And the indictment named 11 counts, including embezzlement, conspiracy, obstruction, and one count that the prosecutor had been careful about and had gotten right: the wrongful death of Kim Woo-jin, the bookkeeper who had found the discrepancy 4 years ago and paid for it. Her father's name appeared in the filing as a federal operative and a material witness, deceased. The prosecutor had been specific. Operative Marcus J. Brooks contributed evidence of substantial value to this proceeding. His contribution is acknowledged in the record. She read that sentence 3 times. Min-jae watched her read it. He said nothing, which was the correct thing, and she was grateful for it. She put the filing down and drank her coffee. "The logistics restructuring proposal is ready," she said. "I want to walk you through the legal framework before you take it to the board." "I told you there is no board." "There will be. That's part of the proposal." He looked at her over his coffee with that expression she had learned to recognize: the recalibration, the adjustment to the fact of her. "A board. Governance structure. Legitimate international logistics and security company requires governance documentation, a board of directors, regulatory compliance across every jurisdiction of operation, and a legal department." She looked at him steadily. "I've drafted the initial structure. 7-member board, 3 external directors minimum, quarterly financial disclosures. Everything above board, everything documented." She paused. "Everything clean." He was quiet for a moment. "The Korea operations are part of the restructuring. The compound becomes administrative headquarters for the Asia-Pacific Logistics Division. Sung runs regional security." She had spent 2 weeks on the framework, and she knew every part of it. "It's workable. I've checked it against Korean corporate law and the bilateral agreements. It's workable." "You've been busy." "I've been doing what I came here to do, which was to become an attorney." She looked at him. "I passed the bar in 7 months. When I do, I want to be in-house counsel for the restructured entity at partner-level compensation with full authority over legal compliance." She held his gaze. "Equal weight to yours in any decision with legal implications." He looked at her. The morning light was coming through the kitchen windows the way it did at this hour, low and gray-white off the river, and it caught the planes of his face and made him look exactly his age, which was a person who had been through enough to know the difference between things that were negotiable and things that were not. "Equal weight," he said. "Equal partners or nothing at all. I thought I made that clear at the beginning." "You made a great many things clear at the beginning, and I'll make a great many more going forward." She looked at the indictment filing on the table between them. "You agreed to every condition I gave you on the first day. This is not materially different. On the first day you were trying to save your brother. Today I'm trying to build something that doesn't require saving in 10 years. She looked at him. Same instinct, different scale. He was quiet. Outside, the river moved. Inside, the kitchen was warm. Somewhere in the house, Soo-yeon was moving through her morning, and somewhere in Queens Jr. was in school right now studying physics and sending Amara texts about YouTube channels she never had time to watch. And somewhere in the federal system, Choi Seung-ho was facing 11 counts that would define the remaining decades of his life, and in Gangwon Province Sung was overseeing the quiet beginning of what would become the Asia-Pacific Logistics Division of a company that didn't have a name yet. "I'll need to see the full proposal," Min-jae said. "It's in the library. On the desk. Flagged by section." He looked at her, a long look, the kind that doesn't perform anything, that is, just looking. Then he said, "My father's organization survived 30 years. It survived because he was willing to do things that others weren't." He paused. "I've been thinking about what makes something survive the next 30, and I think—" He stopped and found the word slowly, which was not how he usually found words. "I think it isn't the capacity for violence. I always knew that, but knowing something is different from being willing to act on it." "What changed?" she said. He looked at her in a way that was its own answer. She looked back at him in a way that was hers. They sat with that for a moment. In the ordinary kitchen of a house that had been too many things in too short a time and was only now beginning to settle into what it might actually be. Then she stood up and picked up the indictment filing and set it in the document archive she had organized along the east wall, because she was systematic about everything and she was not going to stop now. And she said, "I'm going to Columbia this morning. I have a seminar at 10. She picked up her bag. "The proposal is flagged by section. Start with the governance structure. We'll talk tonight." "Tonight," he said. She was almost at the kitchen door when he said her name. She stopped. "When this is finished," he said, "when the restructuring is complete and the legal foundation is built, and your brother is in whatever program he chooses and everything is settled." He paused. "I would like to ask you a question." She turned to look at him. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and the morning light off the river and that expression that had stopped being unreadable. "Ask it now," she said. "I'm not ready now." "You," she said, "are the most prepared person I have ever met." "Not for everything." He held her gaze. "Some things require more time." She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "I'll be home by 7. She used the word without thinking about it, and then she heard it in the air between them after she'd said it, and she did not take it back. She walked out into the November morning, down the gravel drive, to the car waiting to take her to Columbia Law School, where she had 2 semesters left and 7 months until the bar exam and a legal framework for an international logistics corporation that she had drafted in 2 weeks, while also solving a conspiracy that had been running for 11 years and recovering evidence that had cleared her father's name in a federal record that would outlast both of them. She got in the car. She looked back at the house once, the gray stone, the river behind it, the window of the kitchen where she could see, faintly, the shape of Min-jae still at the table. And then she looked forward. The city was ahead. The river was behind. The morning was cold and clear and completely ordinary, which was the most extraordinary thing she had felt in weeks. She was 23 years old. Her father had been a federal operative and a failed man, and someone who carried her 6 blocks on his back to a clinic in the Bronx. And all 3 of those things were true simultaneously, and she was learning to hold them that way. Not reconciled, not resolved, just held, the way you hold complicated things when you've accepted that some things don't simplify, they only deepen. The car moved into traffic. She opened her constitutional law outline on her lap and found her page and began to read. And the Hudson moved south behind her, broad and gray and indifferent and permanent, the way rivers are permanent. Not because nothing changes, but because the moving is the permanence, the constant forward motion that doesn't stop for loss or betrayal or love or grief or any of the things that happen on the shore. It just keeps going. So did she.